Picture this. You are 20 years old, and it is 40,000 years ago. Your entire world is maybe 30 people. Your parents, your cousins, the toddlers who trail behind you when you gather firewood. You know every face in it. And that is exactly the problem. Because somewhere out there, across a river you have never crossed, there is a stranger you have never met. And your survival, not just yours, but every child you will ever have, depends on finding them. This was not romance. This was not a swipe, a spark, a coffee date. This was one of the hardest logistical problems our species ever solved. And the fact that you exist right now listening to this means that somehow our ancestors solved it. Over and over again for hundreds of thousands of years. Without maps, without phones, and without even language as we know it for most of that time. Today, finding a partner means opening an app, scrolling a grid of faces, hoping the algorithm is feeling generous. It is instant, it is global, and honestly, it is a little exhausting. But strip away the technology, and the ancient version of this problem was, in some ways, far more urgent. You were not looking for a partner because you were bored on a Friday night. You were looking because a small band that only mated within itself was a band that would not survive. Genetically, biologically, it was a countdown clock. So how did they actually do it? Let us start with the oldest clue we have, and it is not a bone, it is a bead. At a cave called Blombos, on the southern coast of what is now South Africa, archaeologists made a discovery. Tiny shells, pierced and strung, alongside chunks of red ochre pigment, dating back around 75,000 years, with some ochre use pushing back even further. These were not tools. You cannot cut meat with a shell bead. Researchers who study them believe they were worn on the body, as jewellery, as a kind of visual language. Think about what that means. Before writing, before farming, before most of what we call civilization, humans were already dressing themselves to say something to other people. Scholars studying this ornamentation argue it functioned as social signaling. A way of marking who belonged to which group, and quite possibly who was available and who was not. In other words, the very first fashion statement in human history may have doubled as one of the very first dating profiles. Now fast forward to a site called Sungir, in what is now Russia, roughly 34,000 years old. Here, archaeologists uncovered burials so lavish they still stun researchers today. Thousands of ivory beads, painstakingly carved, covering the bodies of the dead. But the real breakthrough came decades later, when scientists sequenced the DNA of the people buried there. And what they found rewrote the story. A team led by researchers at the University of Cambridge and the University of Copenhagen made a discovery. The individuals at Sungir were, at most, distant cousins. Not siblings, not close kin. Which means these small hunting bands were not mating randomly. And they were not mating within the family either. They were reaching outward, deliberately, into a wider web of neighboring groups. One of the lead scientists on that study, Esk Willersleff, put it simply. He said that when you put the evidence together, it speaks to the really big questions of what made these people who they were as a species and who we are as a result. This was not luck. To pull that off, a network of bands needed some kind of shared understanding. A system. Maybe seasonal gatherings. Maybe symbolic markers, like those ochre-covered beads. Maybe rules passed down through elders about which neighboring group you could court and which one you could not. Anthropologists who study surviving hunter-gatherer societies today, like the Hadza of Tanzania or the Juhoansi of southern Africa, find echoes of exactly this. Some of these societies favor courtship, where young people choose for themselves. Others favor arranged pairings, negotiated between families, with gifts or labor exchanged as a goodwill gesture. Researchers reconstructing the deep ancestry of these practices argue this exchange system, in some form, likely stretches back to the very first migrations of modern humans out of Africa. And what were people actually looking for once they found a stranger worth considering? Studies of the Hadza offer a rare, direct window. Researchers who interviewed Hadza men and women found that men placed unusually high value on a partner's fertility. Women placed high value on intelligence. And both sexes, without hesitation, ranked good character at the very top. Not wealth. Not status symbols. Character. A partner you could trust to share food fairly, to raise children well, to still be standing next to you when the hunt failed and everyone went hungry. There is also a reason this whole system worked on us, biologically. And it did not start with humans at all. Scientists studying prairie voles, small rodents that are one of the rare mammal species to form lasting pair bonds, have mapped out the neural circuits behind that bonding. The same broad chemistry of oxytocin and dopamine that lights up in a human brain when we fall for someone. Researchers who study this describe love as a powerful experience rooted in ancient neurobiological processes, mechanisms that almost certainly predate our species by millions of years. Which means that fluttery, distracted, cannot stop thinking about them feeling, is not some poetic invention of Shakespeare or pop music. It is old circuitry, inherited, repurposed, still running exactly as designed. Here is where the story takes its strangest turn. Because our ancestors were not just choosing partners from their own species. Somewhere around 50,000 years ago, in a window that recent ancient DNA research has narrowed to roughly a 7,000-year stretch, something happened. Homo sapiens moving out of Africa began encountering Neanderthals across Europe and Asia. And they did not just encounter them. They had children with them. Today, nearly every person on Earth whose ancestry traces outside Africa carries a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in their genome, typically between 1 and 2%. A genetic signature of relationships between two different human species, tens of thousands of years ago. Somewhere, a Homo sapiens person looked at a Neanderthal, a being who looked different, moved differently, perhaps spoke a different way entirely, and still chose them. That decision, repeated enough times across a few thousand years, is quite literally written into your own cells right now, whoever you are. So here is the bigger idea hiding underneath all of this. We tend to think of love as a soft, modern luxury, something that came after survival was already handled. But the evidence points the other way. The drive to seek out unfamiliar partners, to signal our worth through ornament and reputation, to build trust across group lines, may be one of the very engineering choices that let our species outlast every other human species on the planet. Pair bonding likely helped make something as demanding as raising a human child, with its impossibly long childhood, actually survivable. Researchers who study the evolution of human social structure argue that strong two-person bonds, layered on top of wider kin networks, gave us something rival hominins simply did not have. A scalable way to cooperate across families and generations. But let us be careful here, because the honest picture is messier than a single love story. Human mating has never followed one universal rulebook. Some ancestral societies leaned toward monogamy, others toward polygyny. Some favored free courtship, others favored arranged matches negotiated entirely by parents. Even today, anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies find this exact same diversity sitting right next to each other on the same continent. There was never a golden age of purely romantic, purely free choice. And there was never a purely cold, purely transactional one either. It was always both, tangled together, the way it arguably still is now. Which brings us back to you, scrolling on your phone, sighing at another unanswered message. It can feel like a uniquely modern kind of exhausting. But you are running software that is at least 75,000 years old. Every dating app, every awkward first meeting, every gift bought to impress someone is a direct descendant of a stranger in an ice age valley, wearing a shell around their neck, hoping it said enough. Our ancestors crossed rivers, crossed languages, and in at least one case, crossed species, all to find somebody worth building a life with. So the next time love feels impossibly complicated, remember it always was. That is exactly why we are still here to complain about it.